Egypt Games, Chapter 12. Elizabethan Diplomacy. When the shapeless, inhuman figure sprang into the middle of the storage yard, the four Egyptians could only clutch each other in panic, too shocked for the moment to even scream. April had just managed to get her mouth open to yell for help, when suddenly Marshall pointed and said, "Look!" A second figure was appearing over the top of the fence. The second invader, who was having some difficulty climbing over the wire, the top of the fence, had a strangely angular look about him. Strangely angular and strangely familiar. And all four Egyptians froze, fear boiled at once in a choking mixture of anger and relief. In April, it overflowed in its stuttering splutter. You dirty finks, she yelled. On top of the fence, Toby finally managed to get his boxy legs free of the barbed wire. He jumped down, losing his TV head in the process. Then, as the four badly shaken Egyptians turned loose of each other and tried to regain their dignity, the monster and box man leaned on each other, choking with fiendish laughter. They laughed, leaning on each other, standing up, bending over as if they were in pain, and finally collapsed, sitting flat on the ground. Then, while the other four members of the Egypt game stared at them, helpless, fuming anger, they just sat there, leaning against each other's backs, still shaking, with gradually weakening seizures. "Man, oh man," Toby gasped finally. "I gotta quit laughing. My stomach is killing me." "Jeez, me too," Ken said. "I'm dying." Ken fell over backwards and just laid there, holding his stomach and saying, "Jeez," weakly from time to time. But Toby crossed his legs and leaned forward with his chin on one hand and stared at the angry Egyptian. "Hey, February," he said finally. "How do you say panic button in Egyptian?" April clenched her fist and took a step forward. Toby started to scramble to his feet. Oh, he'd seen April in action before. But Melanie and Elizabeth grabbed her and held her back. "Turn loose," April said. "I am gonna punch him in the nose." "There's no use doing that," Melanie whispered. "That won't do any good. We can't keep them from telling on us by punching them in the nose." After a moment's consideration, April nodded. "Okay. Turn loose. I won't punch them, at least, not till we find out what they're gonna do." She unclenched her fist, and all three girls approached the enemy. Left behind, Marshall sat down on the edge of the temple floor in a good position to watch everything that might happen. Both the boys were standing now, watching the girls warily. "Well," Melanie began, "are you going to tell on us or not?" "Tell on you?" Ken said. "What makes you think we'd do a thing like that?" "Of course not," Toby said. "We don't go around finking on people." The girls glanced at each other in surprised relief. "However," Toby continued, "this is not a matter of plain and simple thinking. Letting you Egyptians get away with all this secret stuff just might be considered like unpatriotic or something." "Hey, you're right," Ken said. "Maybe we ought to go tell the FBI." "Maybe we should. Or maybe we could just make an official report on the whole scene, like for current events tomorrow morning." Toby stalked to the middle of the yard in what was obviously meant to be an Egyptian walk. Then he faced the group, cleared his throat, and in a phony voice he said, "What's happening in Egypt? A very official report by Toby Elveler, secret agent." Toby was pretty funny, all right, but no one laughed but Ken. April was thinking a horrible thought. If they knew about the Egyptian walk, how much else did they know? Up until then, she'd been thinking that the fence was too high to look over. but they couldn't have seen very much while they were scrambling over it. She ran to the loose boards and looked into the alley. When she pulled her head back, Melanie guessed the awful truth before she heard it. Taking Melanie aside, April whispered, "There are boxes piled up out there. They could have been watching, like forever. Shall I punch them now?" Melanie shrugged hopelessly. "Go ahead if you want to, but it won't do any good. I think we might as well leave the country or something." Elizabeth had followed Melanie and listened to April's horrible news. Now, all of a sudden, she said, "I have an idea." Both the bigger girls looked surprised. Elizabeth wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to come up with ideas in an emergency. But the situation was desperate, so April and Melanie listened. When Elizabeth was finished whispering, April shook her head gloomily. "It'll never work," she said. "Well, we may as well try it," Melanie said. "I mean, it can't make things any worse." The enemy watched cautiously as the girls returned to face them. For a few seconds, April and Melanie couldn't think of a way to get started, and the five of them just stood there, staring at each other. Melanie spoke first. "We don't have permission to be here from the professor, or our folks, or anybody." Toby grinned. "So what else is new?" he said. April's fist clenched, but she forced herself to open them. "We'll be in terrible trouble if you tell on us." She said it as pitiful voice as she could imagine. To her amazement, she noticed that the look the two boys exchanged was just the teeniest bit confused. And Camacha and Oliveira were two guys who weren't easy to confuse. Warming to her theme, she went on, "We'll probably get beaten and everything." There was no doubt about it. The enemy had faltered for a few moments, but they managed to regroup. "Oh, we're crying," Ken said. "See the tears?" "Yeah, we'll come for your funerals," Toby said. Just then, Elizabeth pushed her way between April and Melanie. Everyone looked at her in surprise. She'd probably never spoken to a sixth-grade boy before in her life, but now she looked as if she meant to. "Please," she said in a feathery little voice, "please don't tell on us, and we'll let you play too."